Howdy ho guys, it's Bo here again, and welcome to the Bo Junior vlog. In this entry, I'm going to basically talk about an extension of the previous entry, which is to do with riding the knife edge. You know, this is going to be the title. Well, this is the title of this video. Riding the knife edge, right? So in the previous entry, I talked about things such as balance, or rather, the last few entries I've talked about things like balance and objectivity and discernment, and things like unconsciousness, and all of these things tie into the practice of living better. You know, I also mentioned that for us spiritual people, you know, our journey is different from the average person. You know, by the average person, I mean the person who's kind of more physically inclined. You know, they already do the physical stuff. You know, they're better at that kind of stuff, but they've already done that stuff. You know, making money, getting into good relationships, learning to coexist with people. You know, social skills, leadership skills, money skills, organization skills. They've already done that stuff, and then they move into the spirituality side of things, right? But like we spiritual beings, we come into spirituality early, but then like we get stuck there potentially if we keep denying that, you know, life is part physical. You know, all of that stuff that we're scared of, terrified of, we know that we're shit at, right? We have to face that. You know, we have to learn to live. You know, granted, a lot of that, you know, a lot of what comes from the spiritual journey is, like I said, you know, the spiritual journey doesn't have a direct influence on your life. You know, learning the difference between oneness and duality, you know, plucking a random example, is not going to randomly make you financially independent, is it? You know, rather it indirectly influences your actions and your physical reality based on the choices that you make, right? It doesn't equate to anything, but it does allow you to then manifest that thing. So consciousness, enlightenment, spirituality, all of those things, like I mentioned in the previous entry, they're not going to save you physically, but they are going to help you physically, right? And that's a very, very crucial thing for you to realize and to differentiate between in your mind, right? Spirituality is not a magic pill, but it is going to help you make better decisions, right? But in order to make those decisions, you have to act. You have to hurt. You have to struggle. You have to use your willpower. All of those things that we're scared of, typically as spiritual people, we have to do them, you know, because having an idea does not a great life make, you know, like I'm fucking a great example of that, right? You know, I'm still penniless, more or less. I'm still trying to make my dream possible, but like, I'm taking it bit by bit, you know, and hopefully things will work out for me, but like, we'll see how it goes, right? I'm going to keep moving forwards either way, but yeah, so riding the knife edge, right? Riding the knife edge means exactly what I've been talking about in previous entries. It means not being hung up on one thing over the other, right? I talked about unconsciousness. This is essentially what this is, right? Unconsciousness means not being hung up on any one position, because we have, if you're on this journey, you realize that there's a lot of paradox in the world, right? There are lots of contradictory standpoints, you know, stances, you know, attitudes. And we tend to identify with one or the other, but like, and our capacity for a long time has, you know, generally speaking, has been just to have one side of both sides of the dichotomy, right? But unconsciousness is about releasing, I called it secondary resistance, but like releasing resistance to being attached, or rather releasing attachment to stances, to identities, right? So So, to give you an example, that's the best way to illustrate this. This very topic I'm talking about, right? I made, like I said, the last entry was about not essentially not being too spiritual, but then also knowing when to be spiritual. So, riding the knife edge means that you learn when it is appropriate to be spiritual and to not get in the way of that, and to also know when to like cut the spirituality out and like tone it down and take action and not resist that, right? And this is again an idea. This is an idea that a spiritual person is presenting to you, right? But the practice of it is fucking difficult. Like I said in the previous videos, I fucking suck at living, right? So like the implementation physically of this is fucking difficult, right? Because there will be times in your life when you just want like everything to be fine, and you want everyone to be fucking like to get along, or like you want everything to be resolved, and you're just tired of working so hard, and like you go into your ideas and you're wishing and you're wishing, and it just makes you frustrated because subconsciously that like wishing is not going to make things happen, right? And so like you're going to like that's one hellhole that you're going to drop down. The other hellhole is when like you get too far into the doing and you've lost sight of your original goal, and that can happen too, right? And what happens is this bashing against walls. I mentioned this in previous entries, like this back and forth, where you're going from one extreme to the other, and that bashing is there by virtue of you basically resisting, basically thinking that what you're experiencing at the time is wrong, because like we lag, like in the sense that like it always seems as though when we want to be spiritual, we cannot be spiritual and we must focus on the physical. When we want to be physical, we cannot do the physical because we're mired in the spiritual. Another way you could express this is like with emotions. Like it always seems as though when you should be happy, you're angry, and when you should be angry, you're happy or passive. Isn't that fucking interesting, right? And that is a symptom of not knowing how to ride the knife edge, or rather, ride the wave. Whatever metaphor you want to give it, right? It's essentially this balancing act that we do in life, where like after like doing this shit, it's like actual surfing, right? Like when you're first surfing, you're like because you don't know if you should like go left or right, or like stand up or sit down. Like you don't know the balance, right? So like you fucking wipe out a lot, right? But then eventually you get more and more steady. You learn how to ride the wave, or the knife edge, or whatever you want to call it, right? And that is how you steadily get better at living, essentially. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So, like, I just wanted to give you that perspective because I was just realizing in myself, as like I was going about my day. Like, yeah, I just do this all the time. I'm well aware of this, but sometimes like I just like when it actually happens, it's so devastating that I'm like, oh, fuck, you know. But yeah, and so like I guess this is kind of me preaching to you, but at the same time, I don't want it to sound like I'm preaching to you because, it's perfectly fine to like kind of wipe out all the time, to realize when you're doing something too much, when you're over-identified in something too much. It just happens to us. We're all human, right? Another thing that I was thinking recently that is related to this is like, we're all human, we're all flawed, so people can't hate you necessarily, or rather like, it is pointless for you to get hung up over people hating you for whatever it is you do. And another way of another thing is like, no matter how much you strive to be perfect, you will never be perfect, because your imperfections define you. And if you try to weed those imperfections out, like, something else is going to take its place, That's the whole point of being human, right? It's like, what is perfection? Perfection is, is being, you know, acclimated to whatever situation it is, and having no weaknesses. But like the way that our reality works is like if you take if you take this direction, you're moving away from that direction, right? If you're moving in this direction, you're moving away from that direction, right? And so like you're always going to be like presented with like the fact that you're flawed, right? And so what's the point of getting hung up over people picking at your flaws? There's no point, right? You can still get upset by it, but there's no fucking point to it, right? And that might help you get over being upset by people like pointing out your flaws or whatever it is, right? But at the same time, like we can let that be an excuse to not go out and improve ourselves, right? We can always improve. Improvement is a choice. Improvement is actually exciting. Like obviously hard work is always in the way. And I'm not going to stand here and pretend that I'm someone who like is like, yeah, it's all about improvement. Fucking stop slacking. It's like, I fucking slack. I'm lazy. I'm unmotivated. I get scared at hard work, But like, I have been on the other side a few times, not that many times, but a few times, right, where I've improved myself, and it's like, or like in a really obvious way, and it's like, wow, I overcame something, and it feels good, right? It feels different from what I'm used to, but it does feel good. It feels like I've actually lived, As someone who is like sucks at living, it's like when I actually overcome something or achieve something, it's like, wow, I fucking lived, man, And yeah, so and the point is, there are pitfalls on both sides. You can either be too hung up on what other people say, the fact that you're not perfect, and then that is the typical neurotic, phallic narcissist, like overachiever who like is always trying to be the best and like strive at the expense of his own health and like his relationships and things like that. And then there's the spiritual, and then there's the person who's like, well, we're all flawed, man, like who fucking cares, we're all fine, like I'm flawed, you're flawed, we're all imperfect, so like what's the point of being so hung up over that shit, it's no fucking big deal, just chill, man, just fucking chill. And like, the weed smokers, the stoners, right, the spiritual people, they're like, who cares, man, it's all about love and stillness and peace, love. Peace and fucking love, man. And it's like both of those people, are fucking idiots. And what did I say last entry? You have to be a fucking idiot in order to not be an idiot, Again, it's another one of those things, right? You have to recognize, or, well, you don't have a choice, that's one way of thinking about it. That's one perspective you could use. You don't really have a choice, You have to live this life, unless you choose to die, kill yourself or something, or whatever, you don't have a choice. You're here to live, you don't have a fucking choice, man, or woman, and so that being the case, learn to ride the knife edge, the wave, right? Don't be these people who kind of realize when it's too late, who switch off, And of course, I'm not going to be a judge because I switch off sometimes, right? But like, this is just a perspective, right? This is my spiritual insight, which is just a perspective. It's not going to make you a millionaire. It's not going to make you like a Casanova, It's not going to necessarily solve all of your life's problems and save you from pain, but it is a perspective that you can use, right? So just as an exercise, recognize when you are being like stubborn in a way that's hurting you and possibly other people around you, right? And you don't necessarily have to do anything about it. You don't have to don't like pressure yourself into doing anything about it, really. Just become aware of when you're being overly dogmatic about an idea, an identity that you think you are, an attitude that you think you have, a belief that you think you have, and embrace And from that kind of like detached, slightly detached viewpoint, like, you know, consider the other perspective, you know. Take it at your own pace, you know, like, and, you know, again, I guess I'm more of a chill motherfucker, you know, I'm definitely more of a B type, you know, more of a like, peace and love, man, peace and fucking love. But like, at the same time, you know, recently I've been getting more back into the whole, you know, fuck, I've got to make shit happen, man. I've got to make these fucking vlog videos. I've got to do shit, you know. I can't just sit around and do fuck all. I've got to like, it's time for me to go out and do something. And you see how quickly that happens. It's like in my case, like literally a few days ago or a week ago, I was like, man, fuck all that shit, you know, like, I have me, you know. It doesn't matter what happens, at the end of the day, I have me. And I know that in all of my entirety, with all of my flaws, like, I am always going to be me, and like, there's no one's going to like take that away from me. But like recently, like today, literally, I was like, you know what? I need to fucking do some shit. You know, I need to stop being like a fucking pansy and like at least do something, you know. And it's like you will fluctuate, right? And the more that you learn to ride the knife edge or the wave, you will learn to be able to like go back and forth in a very like smooth way. Like 1 minute you're fucking killing it, the next minute you're just like, hey, peace and love, man. Peace and love. Peace and fucking love, baby. So cool. That was my perspective for this video. I hope it was helpful. I hope it was insightful. And I'll catch you guys in the next entry. Peace out.